Hello, everybody out there. I am your host. I am back. This is Jessica Koch, and this show is Profound Professionals. It's the interview series that for 8 glorious years now, thanks to you out there watching, we have been bringing you industry experts, almost 1,000 from all over the world. They help improve your personal life, they help grow your business. They really just share with us all the things that they love and their skills and their gifts and their time. And today we have the beautiful, the stylish, we love the scarf, Elizabeth. She is a presentation skills trainer and executive coach, and her mission is to get more women's voices heard in places of power. You know, I think whether we're in the grocery store line or whether we're standing on a stage in front of thousands of CEOs, our voice can have power. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you so much, Jessica. I was so excited to be on this wonderful show.
Ah, we're so happy to have you. Now, how did you decide, okay, this is it. This is my skill, my purpose, my focus. I am going to bring power to the voices of the women of the world, and that is going to be the thing I do when I get out of bed. How did that happen for you?
Well, actually, it has evolved. So, I am currently an executive coach and presentation skills trainer, but I started out in the theater, specifically in opera.
Hmm.
It's all communication, you know. Uh, I It really started when I was 5, and
Mm.
first time I walked out on stage, and afterwards I heard my mom say that tell one of her friends that I was the best goddamn bunny rabbit ever to grace the stage of the hillside school, and I was hooked. It's like, oh, they like me. So I said, yes, that's what I'm going to do. So I trained as an actor. And then, from age 5 in the local children's theater up to going up to college. I'm from Portland, Oregon. And so
Mm.
I went to a small independent school where I was the only person who'd had any training. So I pretty much got whatever role I wanted. And then I went off to college in Connecticut with all these kids who'd had like Broadway
Oh,
actors
yeah.
running their theater department, high school theater department. And, I mean, that's part of going up to college is you've been top dog in your high school, and then you get there and everybody was top dog in their high school, and a
Mm.
lot of them were much topper dogs than I was, and I had to pivot. So,
Mm.
I knew I was going to be a theater major, but what I realized was that I was a better director than I was an actor. Fundamentally, I was a character actor in an ingenue body. I didn't really
Mm.
look like the roles I would have been cast in, and so I moved to New York, tried to figure out what I was, and that's where I had always loved opera, and I had a parallel interest in languages. I always wanted to be a citizen of the world, and was fluent in French and pretty good in Italian by the time I graduated.
Mm.
And lo and behold, when I got to New York City, there were all these small opera companies where one could start. And so, I didn't have to go right out of college and go to the Metropolitan Opera. There were places I could learn the trade, and I did everything. I went to
Mm.
work for a small touring opera company where I drove the truck, and I was 50% of the staff, and did that on weekends, and I had a job to pay the rent in the meantime. And through so many ups and downs, realized that opera was where my artistic home was, and
Mhm.
worked my way up through the ranks from driving the truck and cleaning out the rehearsal theater to directing at the Metropolitan Opera and internationally.
Wow. Wow.
So
That is a work your way up.
it is a
Now,
work your way up. Yeah.
were you working on the stage from the stage then, or were you actually
I
running the
was just,
organization business-wise, executive-wise?
oh, that came later. So I was a stage director. So you've got the conductor is responsible for what it sounds like,
Mm,
and the director is responsible for what it looks like. And,
mm,
and fundamentally, it's like the lowest level, it's you go here, you go there.
mm,
But then with someone like Luciano Pavarotti, it's negotiating a peace deal.
mm,
So can you say, so Luciano, in Italian, because you're expected at that level, you're expected to speak the language of the singer, if you
mm,
can. Um, so Luciano, where are you going to be? So I can make sure that they're out of your way, because he went wherever he wanted to go.
mm,
Um, and I got to the point where I wanted to run an opera company. So
mm,
I was at the Met 2 or 3 months of a year, and the rest of the time I was directing independently, and wanted to run an opera company because there's a time careers only get to be so long until they want somebody new. You can be just as good, but unless you can run a company and control whether you got hired, you know, I
mm,
I didn't like not having any control about whether I got hired.
mm.
And that's where the big mistake came, was that I applied for about 3 years. I applied whenever there was an opening. It comes up 3, 4 times a year, and I was always on the short list. They'd fly me in for an interview. They thought I was great, and then I'd see the job go to a man.
Mm,
And I knew that some of that was bias. What I didn't realize till I started coaching was that I was marketing myself to the wrong people.
oh,
I thought that if I just did a good job, I would be rewarded, which is something
mm,
that so many of us
yeah,
this is the story that so many of us are taught, socialized to listen, to learn. What I didn't realize was that being known and beloved by my peers, they weren't the people who were making the decisions.
mm,
And I should have been marketing myself to the board of trustees, because they're the ones who
oh,
make the decision.
right.
So that was my glass ceiling. And ultimately, I started my own opera company, a summer opera company in the Austrian Alps, where
Wow.
young singers, English speaking and German speaking, we had a bilingual program, and we would give them opportunities and chances to practice things, and chances to live and work with someone who might look like you but has a very different idea of how the world works, very
Yeah,
different assumptions.
that's cool. And how did you transition from the world of opera into kind of business space?
Well, and then I found out that after 30 years of it's this, the popular stuff, it's the same 20 arias over and over again, especially with
Mm,
young voices. I realized it was getting to the point where I was getting bored, and
mm,
I was doing things by rote. And I thought, if I don't stop now, if I don't stop now, I'll lose the ability to be moved by music. And
mm,
anybody who's worked in nonprofits, nonprofit arts, any of the arts, it, it's hard enough,
mhm,
and you've got to also love it.
mhm.
So I switched over to being a presentation skills coach, and
Oh,
then worked my way up through that. So I worked with entrepreneurs for a while, then I started working with corporate clients. But what I kept thinking is that I kept seeing how I had sabotaged myself.
mm,
And especially in looking for um, I tell my corporate clients it was my um, looking for a promotion.
mm,
Basically, a promotion from the stage director who gets hired and they're there for 3 weeks and then goodbye, to the person who was actually making the hiring decisions. And I began to see all the mistakes I was making, I had made. Now, if I had known then what I know now, I might be running an opera company right now. But I didn't. And so I made lots of mistakes. And so now what I do is I work with women who are hitting a glass ceiling, whether it's whether it's in their own business as an entrepreneur or whether it's in an organization. Where are you not being heard? Because that was the part that also really infuriated me. Was I had, as the stage director, I had a very defined job. And so they were, I was paid to tell people what to do. And I'm an oldest child, so I kind of like to, I'm kind of bossy anyway,
Me too.
I was paid, I was told, well, yeah, we're oldest children. We know, right? We know. Yeah.
We were the first guinea pig for the parents, so we learned it all.
Right. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So I found that I found that the mistakes I had made had gotten me into big trouble. And so I decided to help other people not make those same mistakes. And then the other piece of it is because I was regularly working in 5 languages. So I speak fluent English, French, Italian, German, and pretty good Spanish. I don't try to write in Spanish because my grammar is terrible, but I can get along. And where I also noticed was this whole glass ceiling thing was that I wasn't taken seriously because I was a girl. But also, I wasn't taken seriously because I wasn't speaking a language that they could understand. And so the way my thought leadership has evolved, especially in the last 5 years when I've been doing a podcast myself and, learning from the guests, I began to see how there's this huge miscommunication in everyday life that we don't talk about because we take it for granted, but it doesn't actually have to be that way. And that is that women think men don't listen to them, and men think that women go on and on and on and never get to the point. And both are true. What I think is that we're using the same words, but we're speaking 2 different languages. And it's not as binary as just men and women. That's the quick way to say it. It's more about single focus thinkers and multi-focus thinkers. And if you did, it's as if single focus thinkers speak Spanish and multi-focus speakers speak Italian. And if you speak
I think
Italian,
it's even deeper than that. But yes, that's
yes. Well,
sure.
This is metaphors are everything in speaking.
Yeah, that's
anyway,
right.
What I found was that if you're going to speak Italian to a Spaniard, they'll understand the gist of what you have to say, but they won't. It is another language. So to really be understood, you've got to speak to them in their language. And this is the cause of so much annoyance and frustration, that if we only recognize that, it's just they didn't hear me because I'm not speaking their language, we could eliminate hours of annoyance, anger, frustration, etc.
So when an entrepreneur or business owner comes to you and you're working with them, you help them communicate better, speaking the language of their ideal audience so that they can attract and magnetize them to them the best fit for them. So who they would best serve, right? Who would best
Right.
receive their services or product. And when you're working with an organization, whether that's corporate or some other kind of a larger entity, what does that look like? Are you going in person to do workshops based on a
So
topic they
I do
choose?
workshops. I have a group program called Visible and Valued,
Is that
and
virtual?
it is a virtual program,
Okay.
but it includes masterminds and cohort, and it's for women. It's like to
Mm,
help women be heard and rise in the organization. Mostly, I mean, like sometimes you're not listened to because they really don't listen to women, but at least 50% of the time,
mhm,
people you're trying to reach aren't listening to you because you're not speaking a language they can hear.
mhm,
And so, and there are other pieces of it, but in an organization, I will do trainings for teams.
mhm,
I will work with the Women's Employee Resource Group or one of the other resource groups,
mhm,
and I also help the single focus people learn how to listen to
mm,
the multi-focus thinkers,
mhm,
so that when the multi-focus thinker, because basically if they're not listening, the multi-focus thinker says it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, until they explode. They're
mm,
so frustrated, and quite often this is why senior women will quit their jobs,
mm,
because they're so tired of not being listened to,
mm,
without realizing that some of it's them.
mhm,
And
mhm,
that I always think that you can shift the way you're perceived by shifting the way you communicate.
mhm,
And this is really what the heart of what I do. Uh, especially when you get a senior woman who's ready to quit because they're
mhm,
not being listened to,
right,
whereas the people who aren't listening have no clue.
right, because 'cause they're not communicating.
Yeah,
Right.
well, and they're not listening. Have no
Mhm,
clue that they're not being that the other person's annoyed until suddenly
mhm,
they explode and they go, "What? Wait, where did that come from?"
mhm.
Um, I actually learned this from a marriage counselor
Ah,
because it's happens between men and women in marriages too.
I would
Actually,
imagine. So it
not
sounds
just
like
men and women, actually. Yeah,
So it
any
sounds
kind
like
of
you
marriage.
have some virtual one-on-one, some virtual
Yep.
group, and then it also sounds like you have opportunities to do maybe keynote speaking and
Mhm.
workshops for larger organizations. Now, if they wanted to hire you for that to sort of weed through and focus in on their diversity programs or give extra support to the women in their organizations or communities, or they just wanted to hire you because they were a woman on their own working a business that they would like to expand beyond that glass ceiling, how would they find you?
The best way to find me is on LinkedIn. So
Mm,
that's the page that I keep really up to date. Um,
mhm.
LinkedIn.com/Elizabeth Bachman. And
Okay.
it's Elizabeth with a Z and
Mhm,
Bachman, Bachman, one N.
mhm.
So there are many ways of spelling both names.
Okay.
Um, yeah. And just reach out to me on LinkedIn because you can see then what I post is lots of tips and strategies
Funny
to
you
help.
mentioned that. That's a great segue because we were going to ask if you could share with the audience a tip today that could help them with their communication, either with their ideal customers, their referral partners, or maybe with their co workers in a working environment or situation. So, could you give us a tip?
Well, the the tip is beware the expert trap.
Mm,
The expert trap is when you give too much how and not enough why.
mm,
So if you're trying to speak to get somebody to take an action you want them to take,
mhm,
fund your project or hire you or hire your services, something like that, promote you, whatever. Uh, think about what they want, and then you can tell them what is the problem that you solve and why it matters. What's the benefit? It's the so that. For instance, when one of the problems I see over and over is that, say, 8 out of 10 of the high level women I speak with tell me that they've got a seat at the table now. So that's great, but they still aren't being listened to and they're frustrated. So what I do is help them communicate it concise and compelling, being interesting.
Mhm.
Everything from how you speak or the melody of your message to how do you present yourself so that they get the results they need and the recognition that they
Mm.
deserve.
Oh, I think that's wonderful. That is definitely a much needed tip we can all use in many aspects of our life, I think, right? And now, how about one of our favorite parts of the show? I know it's mine, and I've seen you out there watching. You get very excited and stretch those fingers and start typing. We would love to hear from you a cause that you care about. The reason we added this to the show from show number one, starting 8 years ago, was because we wanted to inspire others in this moment where we're sharing and learning about people like Elizabeth and Elizabeth. We wanted to take this moment to see if we could inspire someone out there watching to give time, treasure, or talent, or even just spread awareness about causes that are close to our guest heart and to your heart. So you've been putting them in the comments, you've been hitting share, someone else hit share, someone gets inspired to give to your cause or to Elizabeth's. And you know what else? Sometimes they just go, oh yeah, I have a cause I love. Let me call them up. I got busy. You get refocused, and it's nice to be reminded of doing something a little bit outside of ourselves. So share with us, Elizabeth, a cause that you care about, please.
Well, the first thing I would say is go to a performance at a local arts organization.
Yes, we love doing that.
Support your local arts organization. But there's not a URL for that. That's for whoever you want. So if you want to do something global that
Mm,
has an easy link, I would say the World Wildlife Fund.
mm,
That's where people who do their best to help ecosystems and animals to conserve the
mm,
diversity of life on the
mm.
planets.
You
I
know,
truly, very important to know that human beings are not the only entities out there.
it's so, so very true. If you ever get to be in the presence of a giraffe or an elephant, sometimes when you don't have small children, you don't go looking for these opportunities to be around these grand, majestic, amazing animals. And when you're standing there, so very close to them, it is really quite an experience. And you just do have this awe for nature outside of ourselves. So,
Yeah. Well, and one of the things is that, and I said I was at a children's theater from the age of 5.
mhm.
Basically, they sent me to the local children's theater so I could take acting lessons till I grew out of it, and I stayed for 10 years. So it was located in the zoo in Portland, Oregon.
Oh,
Portland,
that's
Oregon
nice.
has a famous zoo, and in the children's zoo for many years, there was the Ladybug Theater, and
Mhm,
so I more or less lived at the zoo, which meant when I had time off, I went around and I looked at the animals, and,
mhm,
it was, and listened to what the trainers and the attendants were saying.
mhm.
So that's something that I learned very early on.
Well, and I'll say about theater is, uh, I I love my team, and one of the tasks I have them do for my personal life is in the spring and in the fall when all of the kind of shows are coming out in our area. I have them make a spreadsheet for me of all of the local theaters, what shows are playing, what time period, the links to get the tickets, including the local high schools. We
Ah,
go to the high schools too, and see the shows that the schools put on and support the community that way too. And I have a 13-year-old, and she was the lead at her school play. She was Alice, and she's participated in all the plays, but she was the lead the one year, and she just loves it. And such a great public speaking experience for children, and opportunity. So I think the arts are truly wonderful. The ability to be creative. If there's something that you do and you wish you could just focus on it, I mean, stop wishing and look for a grant, because there are grants that will help you be a full-time artist if that's what you want it to be. There's so much money out there and resources that can support you. You just have to really want it bad enough to seek it. Wouldn't you
Well,
say?
and if you're going to do it professionally, you have to treat it like business.
Yeah,
So that
absolutely.
was what my opera company was about, was part of
Mhm,
giving young singers an opportunity, but we also taught entrepreneurship classes.
mhm,
And the colleges finally caught up by the time we were done, but that
mm,
was something that I was teaching all along, which is, I'm thrilled that you can sing this fabulous aria. Let's teach you how to get paid for it.
mhm, mhm.
So
Now, in the next part, get typing again. If you're an author and you've written a book, or you have a book that inspired your personal life or helped you grow your business, get typing, share the books. It just might be, I always believe, and I love the saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will arrive. And that's so often been the case with me for books that have just really moved me in the moment. They showed up on my doorstep right at the right time, or I found them on a bookshelf. They'd been there for years, never cracked it before, and read it for the first time just at the moment I needed to hear those
mhm.
words of wisdom from someone else. And so put those in the comments. And Elizabeth, please share with us a book that inspired your personal life or helped you grow your business.
Well, I've always been interested in other cultures, how other people think. Probably started from my early training as an actor, where like you put yourself into the the thought process of somebody else. So one of the ones I go back to over and over is called The Culture Map by
Mm,
Erin Meyer.
mhm,
And she teaches at the business school outside Paris called INSEAD. And
mm,
she wrote this book about, if you've got a team with people from around the world, or people around you, how do they think? How does that work? How do you function if you're, speaking Japanese is a language where where so much is assumed,
mm,
whereas English is a language, American English especially, is a language where very little is assumed,
mm,
because America was created as a melting pot. So the
mhm,
American language has to be very direct and above board.
mhm,
Whereas something like Japanese, or I don't speak Indonesian, but I'm told that is that
mm,
they assume you're not supposed to say things directly. You're supposed to
mm.
just know, which of course assumes that you grew up in Japan and you learned all this. So I'm always interested in the way people think.
Yeah.
What makes it interesting? And so the book's about 10 years old, and I still go back to it over and over again.
Wonderful. I love that. Now, before we start talking about a little bit about your podcast, is there anything else about yourself or your business that we didn't cover yet that you'd love to share?
Well, as I said, I was an international opera director for 30 years. And so a lot of the time, my job was to speak to people in a language they would understand, not just their
Mhm,
actual language, but to learn how to communicate, to get them to want to do what I wanted them to do. My
mhm,
job was to have a vision, work with a bunch of really smart, really Italian talented people who mostly thought they could do it better than I could, and convince them to follow my vision,
mhm,
and then pull the best
mhm,
out of each person over the course of the rehearsal period, and
mhm,
then deliver results. Because also I was working would be working for an organization, so I had to deliver a result that was ready
mhm,
by that 8 o'clock Saturday night that's going to roll around, and there are people in those seats who are paid a lot for the tickets. And the other part that wasn't really spoken of, but I was always aware of, is that I needed to deliver something that was so satisfying it would get people to donate.
mhm,
Because
mhm,
opera's expensive, and opera companies
Mhm.
are nonprofits. So to get
Mhm.
people to say, great, this is great, we've got to go see it. And
Mhm.
yes, I'm going to write you a check.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Now tell us about your podcast.
So my podcast is called Speakers Who Get Results.
Mhm.
And it ran from 2019 to 2024. It's now finished. We're recording this in December 2024. There's
Mm,
one more episode coming out for New Year's.
mm,
And then we've got 5 years of content sitting there. You can find us on YouTube, on Apple,
mm.
or on elizabethbachman.com/podcast.
Okay.
And it's a series of conversations about leadership, presentation skills, communication. How do you inspire your team? How do you take care of yourself? Uh, Mostly written for someone who's a sort of a senior manager, middle to senior manager, um, and mostly female on how do you navigate this?
Mhm,
And the other thing is because I talk about diversity a lot, so inclusion. So different
mhm,
people, I make a great effort to make sure that I have Black speakers and Asian speakers and gay speakers and Latinx speakers all throughout. So
mhm,
I made an effort actually with the podcast production company to make sure that the pictures look like the world we live in. They aren't just you can just default to people in business, white people in business suits. And I am gay and I have a disability which you cannot see. It's an invisible disability. So I I know what it's like to be in the minority, and I
mhm,
also know what it's like to look like the majority,
mhm,
even though I'm in the in part of a minority.
mhm.
And so I think about that dance a lot.
I think as the world has changed too, there's prejudice for all kinds of reasons.
Yes.
And so many of us experience the feeling of that. Um, no matter what we might look like, or someone might assume, oh, you don't know, you couldn't possibly know what that is like. That isn't necessarily true. I think most people have experienced some version of it, many more than others, and
Uh-huh.
then those people have other things. Everyone
Yeah.
has a thing. Everyone has a trial or a tribulation that they're dealing with, and a challenge to overcome. uh, so.
Well, and this brings me back to what we were saying earlier in terms of when you want to communicate with someone,
Mhm.
put yourself in their shoes and
Mhm,
what do they care about?
mhm,
So, try to interpret the world the way they would interpret it instead of just assuming that they're going to think the same way you do. So, I really think more about thinking styles and
mm.
different sorts of thinking styles. And then how do you navigate that?
Well, I think that's a very difficult order that you laid out, and one of the best ways to navigate and actually achieve what you suggest is by asking lots of questions, because often we
Yes.
can have no idea how or what your shoes even look like, let alone step our feet into them, unless we care enough to ask lots and lots of questions.
And
And
listen.
and listen. It has been very, very lovely, Elizabeth, to have you on our show today. I hope you've enjoyed it also.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Now, if you're out there thinking, wait, I have something to say, I have something to offer, I could help people with their personal lives or grow their business, then maybe you should jump on our show as well. Reach out to our team and we'll tell you just how to get featured. And before we go, Elizabeth, I would love to ask you to give us a final thought, a piece of information or inspiration as we close the show today.
Well, this is one of my favorite exercises to deal with nerves.
Hmm.
So, a lot of people won't raise their voices because they're scared of what people will think of it. It's good old stage fright. And I learned this from working with the opera singers is if you have to speak to a group of people, most of the time if you're nervous, it's because the voices in your head are saying, they're going to think I'm stupid. I'm going to forget what it is. I'm going to look like a fool. They're going to think. But actually, you can't really know what they're thinking.
Mm-mm.
So the way to get past that is to put yourself in their shoes again. And what I like to do is imagine that the people who are listening to me are guests that I've invited to a dinner party. So I'm bringing them into my space. It's not that I'm giving them control. Actually, I'm in control. This is my dinner party, and they're my guests. And my knowledge is the food I'm serving.
Mm.
My knowledge, my expertise is the food I'm serving. And of course they love it because it's delicious.
Of course.
But also the places where we sabotage ourselves as presenters over and over is when we ask for something and we ask someone to do something. It's so easy to get into the mindset of, oh my God, I'm asking for money. They shouldn't want money. Or I'm asking them to hire me or to do this or that. They're going to think da, 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 da. Think about it as if your offer is dessert.
Mm.
So you think about your favorite cake, and that you've got these guests, you've gotten them warmed up because you fed them a really good dinner, and then if you invite them to invest in themselves
Mm-hmm.
by working with you, by saying yes to you, that's the dessert. And if you get into the offer to the ask as you are going to benefit so much by saying yes to me, that will help to calm down the voices in our head, which
Mm.
otherwise will otherwise get us to sabotage ourselves.
Mm. Well, I think that's lovely advice. And I thank you very much again for being here on the show. We thank all of you out there for watching and listening and sharing. We love you very, very much. And until next time, I'm your host, Jessica Koch. This is Profound Professionals. Be kind to yourself out there and be kind to each other. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.